In this video, we will review the 5 levels of training outcomes in the popular Kirkpatrick-Phillips model, and the methods we might use to measure these outcomes. Trainees' reactions to the program make up the first level. These reactions include their perceptions of, their opinions of, and their satisfaction with different elements of the program. We usually measure reactions with post-training surveys. Learners may rate their level of agreement with different statements about the training content, the training methods, the learning environment, and the trainer. Some items are closed-ended and use Likert-type rating responses, while others are open-ended and collect more details about trainees' experience. We should also calculate a net promoter score for every learning event. This score represents the promotability of a program, the probability that trainees will recommend it to their colleagues. You will learn more about this concept later in the module. Although reactions are the most frequently measured outcomes, they have the weakest relationship with learning and transfer. They are most useful for assessing changes in attitudes and some knowledge. Here are a few examples of the types of questions we might use to measure trainees' reactions. Here are a few examples of the types of questions we might ask trainees to measure their reactions. Did you like the program? Was it organized, engaging, rigorous, meaningful? Was the trainer effective? Was the learning environment supportive, conducive to learning? Would you recommend this program to a colleague? What did you learn from this program? Skill-based outcomes are related to changes in behaviors, actions, and skills. This includes technical skills associated with a job or occupation, as well as motor skills that use physical movements. Trainers can measure this outcome by observing learners during training using checklists, or by rating actual demonstrations of the behaviors and skills. Self-assessments can be useful for developmental purposes, but as you know, they are susceptible to social desirability responding. We can also assess learning outcomes by measuring the change in trainees' attitudes, motivation, and other internal qualities. For example, training might focus on increasing trainees' self-efficacy, developing more of a learning orientation, or enhancing people's appreciation of diversity. To assess these outcomes, self-assessments are often used. But we can also use evidence of behavioral changes as a proxy for attitudinal changes. If trainees have higher self-efficacy as a result of training, for example, we might expect to hear them speak with confidence and refrain from negative self-talk. These behaviors are easier to measure than some internal state, like attitudes. Learning outcomes make up the second level. To assess the extent to which trainees learned from the training, we can measure cognitive, affective, and skill-based outcomes. In this model, cognitive outcomes include knowledge, like facts, principles, procedures, processes. We are most interested in seeing whether trainees' knowledge increases, whether they have more knowledge after participating in a program. We often use what are called paper and pencil tests, even though many of them are now administered on the computer. We use these tests because they provide a more objective view of what trainees learned. We can also use self-assessments, but trainees' own estimations of how much they learned are heavily influenced by their reactions to the program. The better the reactions, the more they say they learned. However, their test results don't always validate the self-assessment results. For this reason, I suggest sticking with the traditional paper and pencil tests. You were already familiar with the concept of transfer of training, which forms the third level of outcomes in the Kirkpatrick-Phillips model. Again, transfer is the application of learning to the job. Just as skill-based outcomes can help us assess learning outcomes, they can help us measure transfer outcomes. In this level, we're concerned with technical and motor skills, as well as social and conceptual skills. We can use work sample tests, observation, and self-assessments to measure transfer. Managers and coworkers can rate the degree to which trainees use their skills on the job and how well they use them. We must pay attention to whether the work environment is supportive of transfer. Did trainees have opportunities to perform, for example? As we move up the levels, the data we collect becomes more focused on the organization and less focused on the individual learners. The fourth level is results, a measure of how the training program impacted the organization. Did the program produce the expected results? Did it increase sales, and by how much? Did it reduce errors, and by how much? Some other examples include increased productivity, increased quality, better customer service, decreased costs, and decreased turnover. Ideally, we gather this information from the organization using big data, a concept we'll cover in the next module. Personnel files, historical records, and training technology can also provide valuable information. This is where Kirkpatrick's model stops, and the next level is where Phillips' contribution begins. The fifth level was added on by Phillips. Return on investment, or ROI, is a ratio that tells us how much of a return the company gets for every dollar it invests in a training program. If we invest $10,000, we hope to get that much and more back by increasing sales and minimizing errors, for example. Although this data is extremely valuable to strategic leadership, very few companies evaluate training at this level because it requires a great deal of time, know-how, and data. ROI calculations are based on the monetary values of training costs and benefits, both of which can be identified through a cost-benefit analysis. Benefits include the results we just learned about. Direct costs include things like the cost of paying trainers to teach and trainees to learn, of creating and printing training materials, and of training facilities and travel. Indirect costs include things like the salaries of support staff and the cost of a learning management system. We've covered the 5 levels of the Kirkpatrick-Phillips model. Imagine you had information about what trainees thought about a program, how much they learned and transferred to the job, how the organization benefited, and how much those benefits are worth. Armed with all of this data, you could align the program so that it helps people do their jobs better and has a valuable impact on the organization as a whole.